the first casualty of war is the truth. And here in the State of the Nation, we don't run away from the issues. We want to talk to the people involved. We need to know what's going on with the Israel-Palestine war, which is now dragging on. People are dying. A lot of question marks about what's going on in that particular conflict. So we're going to go right to the scene, and that is to Israel, where we are going to be joined by South African journalist now based in Israel, Rolene Marks, where we're going to have a discussion about what life is like, and we're going to hear her side of the story. So before we start this interview, I'd like you, please, support our sponsors, Pace Car Rental. Go onto their website when you book a car, use the code SONA, and you'll get a discount. And now let's go on to our interview. We are with South African-born journalist now based in Israel, Rolene Marks. Rolene, welcome to the State of the Nation. As we've been communicating and as we've said, on this platform, we like to really tackle issues or talk about what's going on. And the issue that has dominated or certainly been in the news now, it feels like forever, has been the Israel-Palestine situation. And South Africa obviously famously got involved. And it's just time to hear from somebody on the ground so that you can tell us exactly from your perspective, what life is like in Israel. So welcome to the State of the Nation.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here, and shalom from Israel to all of your viewers and your listeners. As I was saying off air, if you do hear a funny noise that is followed in quick succession by sirens, please note we are still under attack by Iranian proxies, either the Houthis in Yemen or, as in the case yesterday, Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So I am in my shelter, but I do have to preclude every conversation with warning people that you might hear the early warnings and the sirens following. And that leads us into exactly what we are talking about. What is it like in Israel at the moment? And you can see I'm wearing a yellow ribbon. This is for our hostages. And no matter what the conversation is, our hostages, their situation, the fact that they have now been held in captivity for 717 days, with the exception of one, Hadar Golden, who fell in combat in Operation Protective Edge in 2014. His remains have been held captive since 2014, so now over 11 years. So to get an understanding of what we are feeling, that dominates our everyday life, along with the fact that we are now nearly 2 years after the horrific events of the 7th of October, which I remember as clear. I can remember that day by the 2nd, and we are still very much a country in profound trauma. I won't even say that we have moved to post-trauma, because we are still involved in war, having had to fight on multiple fronts, at least 7 fronts kinetically, and the other 2 fronts I call the war against anti-Semitism and the war against the media narrative. And as we are now seeing over the last 24 hours or so, the diplomatic war. So we are fighting on so many different battlefields, both kinetically and non-kinetically, and it takes a massive, massive toll. I think that the world, and certainly the media, is very much focused on what is happening in Gaza, understandably. And, we in Israel have tremendous empathy for our civilian neighbors. But I think the world also forgets that there is another party in this war that is also enduring trauma, also enduring massive loss from the 7th and the years following, and that is the people of Israel.
Now, let's go back to the 7th of October 23. And, not to relive every moment, that was played out on our screens. Always a terrible situation where you have, people at a festival, people just going about their lives being gunned down by a military body, right? But of course, the question, and it's obviously been analyzed in great detail, but the question that I have is, Israel has been renowned for its military capacity, its intelligence service, Mossad, etc., cameras, well fortified border structures, etc. How, from an Israeli perspective, this tremendous military breach, what has been the explanation for that? Because I've followed it quite closely, and nothing I've heard seems to be satisfactorily explained. Do you know something? Can you shed some light on that?
Well, there have been investigations. The army have conducted their own internal investigations, and the results have been made public. And they have accepted full responsibility for where their failings are. The Shin Bet, who are the internal intelligence branch of our security forces, they have conducted their own. And I think what we saw, first of all, to go back to that day, and for us as Israelis, speaking about the events of the 7th of October are extremely cathartic and healing. It's an opportunity for us to bear witness on behalf of the over 1,200 victims and share our perspective. And it's very important that people understand that it wasn't just festival goers at music festivals. It was also very, very peaceful kibbutz communities along the border. In fact, those kibbutz communities were the vanguard of the peace movement in this country. What we do know is that a lot of intelligence was given from many of the Palestinians who had come in to work in the kibbutz fields on a daily basis. They had been sharing intelligence with Hamas, who are an internationally recognized terrorist organization, as well as many of their cohorts in the Gaza Strip. And unfortunately, on that day, we also saw civilians from the Gaza Strip also coming in another wave of infiltration and committing the same atrocities that Hamas did. And of course, there were also those military outposts that were also invaded. And one of the areas of huge concern was the warning given by the female observation soldiers. In Hebrew, we call them tatzbitaniyot, who were warning of suspicious activity that they were noticing, and the fact that attention was not paid to that. And their superiors have admitted the massive failings, and several of them have actually resigned their positions, having accepted responsibility for that. We also had, because it was Simchat Torah, a holy day in the Jewish calendar, which is a fact of the 7th of October, many people have forgotten that this happened on the Sabbath, and it happened on one of what we call the Big Five Jewish holidays, Simchat Torah, when people were in synagogue, when a lot of our armies stationed on the border would have been home with families for the holidays. And the unfortunate finding that a lot of focus was pushed into Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, and a lot of our resources were there as well. But when you study how Hamas planned this, and you understand the role Iran played in this, they were very, very clever to understand that to breach, to infiltrate Israel, who is so fortified, they would have to resort to almost privative means, which is exactly what they did with the way that they breached through the hand gliders coming in through the air, through sea, and blowing up sections of the security fence that ran the perimeter of the border. So investigation has gone in. There has been a lot of criticism that the Prime Minister has not accepted responsibility for this, which is what I think the people of Israel want to hear. And there is a lot of discussion around a national investigation. Our president, Isaac Herzog, has said there has to be a national investigation. The Prime Minister has balked at it, saying this can only happen when we have concluded the war. But I think that as the days go by, more and more we are hearing from the Israeli public, we want to know what has gone wrong. What happened? What led to this most horrific massacre of our people, the taking captive of over 250, of which 48 are still in captivity? What happened that we endured in our home, in the Jewish homeland, the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust?
But you would surely understand some of the cynicism that it may have been a convenient breach to provoke the reprisal that we've seen, because it wouldn't be the first time that a war was provoked, and this one looked this does sort of come straight out of the top drawer of suspicion. Israel keeping such close tabs on the Palestinian territories. We understand they used unconventional means, but this is a society renowned for its technology and so on. Do you think there's anything to be said that this looks, especially given that Benjamin Netanyahu seemed to be quite uncomfortable in his position and have a very shaky coalition that was only just clinging onto power, and he had a few charges to face? Do you think there's any merit in that thinking at all?
Absolutely, categorically reject that. There is no way that Israel, and people can deliberate on however they see the Prime Minister and his position in his office, there is no way Israel would have allowed this to happen, given the level of atrocity, given the slaughter of our people that happened that day. We know from intelligence gleaned how well planned this was from or by Hamas. I have seen the evidence for myself. I have seen those orders to rape, to behead, to mutilate, to take captive. I have seen the plans to these kibbutzim myself. So that I absolutely categorically reject. If anything, Benjamin Netanyahu has also prided himself on being Mr. Security. He has always prided himself on
which
being
makes it more...
the one leader that can
which
guarantee
raises more
security,
questions.
and he couldn't guarantee security on that day. He failed on that day, which is maybe why we see that he is absolutely relentless when it comes to what he calls total victory, because this was the biggest blight on his record as the man who has always promised security to the people of Israel. But absolutely, as a citizen, as a journalist, as somebody who has seen the evidence, who has seen the footage, who has seen the submissions from our side to the ICJ, myself, I absolutely categorically reject any kind of theory that this could have been a setup by Israel or the Netanyahu government to provoke a war.
How is he standing within the Israeli citizenry at the moment? Because there was, he was seemingly in political trouble and remains there. But how popular is Benjamin Netanyahu now?
Well, I always say, if anyone had to ask us, what is our relationship with the Prime Minister? It's like a Facebook relationship thing. It's very, very complicated. Yes, he has his diehard supporters who I think also get extremely frustrated with him. But he's the only Prime Minister or world leader I know whose approval ratings do this. They don't do that. They do this. His approval rating will spike as it did in June when we went to war with Iran, when we finally tackled what we call the head of the snake. But it will also plummet as it does, because we are very, very frustrated with the situation that we still have 48 hostages, 48 for us, not just names and faces, 48 universes that are still held captive. We want them now. The majority of this country want a deal. Just, agree to whatever, just get those people home. We all accept that we cannot have Hamas on our borders, and it's various degrees of, do we deal with them now, or do we kick the can a little further down the road and deal with them then? But one thing is for sure, we need our people back. And we need to see from the Prime Minister a lot more empathy towards our hostage families, a lot more empathy to the victims, and he must do whatever he needs to do to make sure those hostages come home. We are sitting now, it's Erev Rosh Hashanah, it's the eve of the new year, and my heart is broken for the 48 families, including non-Israeli citizens. And this is very important because people don't realize we have a hostage from Nepal, Bipin Joshi, who was here to study agriculture, taken captive. We have the remains of Joshua Molel, a Tanzanian, also student of agriculture, brutally murdered in full view of the world to see by Hamas, and whose body remains captive in the Gaza Strip. We want every single one of them back home now.
Are you suggesting that after 2 years and almost total decimation of Gaza and complete control of the area, that it's still not known where those hostages are being kept? That seems almost unbelievable to me.
Well, I believe we know where the hostages are kept. We've heard this confirmed by President Trump. The issue is getting to the hostages. We had the horrific situation just over a year ago when our forces got closer and closer to where Hamas was holding 6 of our hostages, and they were brutally murdered just hours before those troops could get to them. So this is the concern. The concern is Hamas using our hostages as a human shield, including the remains. For us as Jews, for us as Israelis, no man left behind. This is part of our ethos. But I want to also explain something to viewers and listeners. In order to understand what Gaza looks like above ground, you need to understand what Gaza looks like subterranean. And you need to understand the tunnel system that Hamas very carefully prepared for 2 decades. Hamas prepared this war for over 2 decades. The media narrative, the human shield strategy, which has been documented in great detail by the Henry Jackson Society, who have been into Gaza. I have been into Gaza, contrary to popular belief that journalists can't go into Gaza. And they have studied this war, and they have filed reports on Hamas's human shield strategy, which, when you understand that, you understand why Gaza looks like it does. You understand the tunnel systems underneath. You understand that those tunnels have entrances in hospitals, in children's bedrooms. When I speak to soldiers, they tell me, Rolene, we go straight to the child's bedroom in a house once we've cleared it for booby traps, because that is where we find weapons caches, and that is where we find tunnel entrances, including the tunnel where our beautiful 6, where our hostages who were murdered were found. Homes are booby-trapped. Mosques are used as command centers. Hospitals have been used as command centers. And this we have admitted by Hamas operatives who we have captured and who we have interrogated. They're very happy to tell you. In fact, Hamas themselves are very happy to tell you we are prepared to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of our citizens. Our citizens will stop the bombs with their chest. They are telling you what their intentions are. The difference between the world and Israel is we believe them.
Yes, but as you mentioned, there was 20 years of preparation that went into this. Once again, did that go on without anybody sort of understanding that all these pipes that were meant for water reticulation weren't being used for water reticulation? There must have been massive sort of digging going on. And we're not talking about an area. This isn't South Africa where the areas are vast. We talk about something you can see with a pair of binoculars. I'm just saying it's a small area, and there was this massive activity. You start getting that vision of this being allowed to brew.
Well, I don't think it would have been allowed to brew. If you go back to May of 2023, we had another conflagration, another military operation where there were masses of rockets fired into Israeli civilian centers. And the understanding from the intelligence that we gathered from there was that Hamas were not interested in any kind of flare-up. Israel was using what we call the carrot and stick approach, that if they were, quiet would be met with quiet. If they did not get involved, then we would allow for more work visas for Palestinians. And by the time the 7th of October happened, we had tens of thousands of Palestinians coming into Israel every single day to work to earn money. And the understanding was that Hamas are in no way looking for any kind of conflagration, that there were times that they were unable to quell Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the other terrorist groups, and the Israeli jets would strike targets within the Gaza Strip to decimate tunnels, to decimate weapons caches, and that would be the cycle. And I think that we underestimated the involvement of Iran in this, and we underestimated just how big the operation that they were planning would be.
Now, let's just go to some of the, certainly in the coverage in South Africa, there's almost sort of general, something that does resonate is that it feels like Gaza was what's the term, an open air prison. Life was so miserable for Palestinians living in Gaza that this left them no option but to do what they did.
Then how come they didn't attack Egypt? People forget that Egypt shares a border with the Gaza Strip as well. And, when we see many people sharing images of Gaza before the war with fun fairs and roller coasters and hotel industry and tourism and restaurants. By the way, restaurants are still open in the Gaza Strip, and there is still nightlife, there is still life happening in the Gaza Strip. When we see that, we think, what open air prison are you talking about? Because in our history, we know what it is like to live in a prison, in an open air prison. We know that very well. What kind of open air prison issues work visas to tens of thousands of workers to come in every single day to work in our fields, to work in industry, to earn better money in Israel than they would in the Gaza Strip. One thing that it has done, it's opened our eyes in Israel to looking at the situation in Gaza. And I can tell you something, some of the supermarkets that we've seen are even nicer than our supermarkets, and that is not an open air prison. And I think that it is also quite horrendous to abdicate Egypt of all their responsibility. In every single war that we have seen throughout the history of war, civilian populations are allowed to flee. We saw it with Ukraine when Russia invaded. Egypt will not open its borders to civilians in Gaza. They will not allow them safe passage into the Sinai, where they can be safe from the vagaries of war. Jordan has not opened borders to the people of Gaza. Other countries have not opened borders to the people of Gaza. Egypt is in violation of treaties that says that if there is a refugee community in a time of war, you have to open your borders. So I think what we're seeing in the South African media is very, very much a slanted view. I have noticed myself that there is a shutting down of any pro-Israel voice, of any Jewish voice in the media. So you do not get a balanced view. You get a slanted, and I would say government-sanctioned view of what is happening, and you don't get history, and you don't get context, and you don't get a bigger picture, which is why it is so important to have these conversations that we are having today.
Now, I would suggest that much of the coverage is influenced a lot by the visuals. And, you know, this is the 21st century. Everybody's got a newspaper in their pocket. And obviously, some of the visuals are too ghastly for words. We've seen a complete area flattened, literally flattened. It seems like there's a big building would go down, and it seems like the size of the building that must go down just gets shorter and shorter. And it does look, dystopian to see what Gaza looks like at the moment. Do you think that the response, and I'm not a big fan of the idea of proportionality, because, when a proportionality is not, there's no formula, there's no handbook that says, for everyone one, it doesn't work that way. I get it. Otherwise you can go back and review any conflict ever. So, I'm not talking about proportionality. I'm just talking about the humanity of the situation, where literally almost nothing is being left standard and tens of thousands of people have been killed.
Well, I think it goes back to my argument that you have to understand what happens subterranean to understand what happens above ground. And we have had military professionals, including the head of urban warfare studies at the West Point Military Academy, who have said that first of all, you've got to understand urban warfare in the context of Gaza. This is not Fallujah. This is not any other place in the Middle East where you've got space. This is very, very, very dense urban warfare. And according to the military officials that have gone into Gaza to investigate this war, including NATO officials, they are very, very happy with the way that Israel is conducting this war. The way that we are evacuating civilians, the way that we are warning civilians, the way that we have created humanitarian corridors. This is an absolute fact. What you're not seeing in your media is anything on Israel's side of the border. You're not hearing from the hostage families. You are not hearing from the former hostages. I will guarantee you that the cynical, despicable footage released by Hamas just weeks ago of an emaciated Eviatar David and Ron Braslavsky, Eviatar forced to dig his own grave, did not make it into any echelon of the South African media. I guarantee you that you did not see any of the destruction on Israeli infrastructure from the bombs that Iran was sending over, that sent us into our shelter several times a day and night. And just 10 minutes away from me, an entire city block was decimated. People's homes, people's businesses. I can also guarantee you that you didn't see the footage. Unless you were following on social media on the 7th of October, you did not see the footage of Hamas gleefully filming every second of their slaughter, and I'm going to be very graphic here, of beheading people, of shooting babies in the head. And yes, the story of beheaded babies is confirmed by our forensic experts. You did not see what they did to our women. And yes, to some of our men. That has been absolutely scrapped from the South African media, along with all the reports to back it up. I have, unfortunately, as a journalist, and journalists are first responders in a way, I unfortunately have had to see that with my own eyes, and not only see it, I have smelt it. Smells that never leave your consciousness, I think, for the rest of your life. That side is completely shut out by the South African media, who are peddling a very, very biased and narrow narrative.
I don't know if I agree 100%, because it's impossible to hide anything anymore. We get our fill in South Africa, obviously, like every country, and you know South Africa well. We are, taken with our own issues. This isn't some sort of utopian paradise. So, these external conflicts, especially ones that are quite far away, generally don't get the kind of coverage that local events get. But we've seen the graphics, and anybody that wants to find it finds it. I mean, it's there, and it has been reported on. I mean, all I'm suggesting here is that the response has been extremely heavy on the civilians. Now, I do understand that Israeli civilians were attacked, but is there still an appetite within Israel to keep this up, for those numbers just to climb, of Palestinians, as you say, border closed on one side, at war with the other side, and people caught in the middle? At what point does someone shout uncle?
Well, no one wants war. Let's be very, very clear. This is a war that nobody wanted. I don't think Palestinians wanted it, and we certainly did not want it, because war is ugly. War is ugly. I notice that the world is getting a front row view to the war in Gaza, but you're not getting a front row view to wars anywhere else. War is horrendous. War is people dying. War is infrastructure decimated. War is people losing their homes. War is people being displaced. War is people sometimes not having access to enough food. War is horrendous. None of us want the war. War for us as well. War for us also means orphans and widows and families losing their loved ones. We don't want war either. And this war could end in a second if Hamas give back our hostages and they surrender.
So what do you suppose informs the loss of the media struggle by Israelis? If the cause is so just, and I'm not suggesting, I do understand, like I said to you before, I have a sort of a seat at the table. My heritage is from just across the other border in Lebanon. I'm sitting over there, and I don't know what to even make of this. But clearly, Israel are doing something wrong to lose the media battle to the extent that it's lost. It has lost it. You're in the media.
I think there's several factors. I think there are a lot of, we'll call it, external factors influencing certain media outlets. If I look globally, you only have to see who the major advertisers are on certain media channels to understand why we have such a skewed media. I think we are in a situation where the media today don't check facts. They go with whatever narrative is the most sensational, because it's a very, very competitive industry. I think some media outlets like the BBC.
So which facts are you saying? Sorry, just before we move on, which facts are you saying the media is not checking?
I think there's a lot. I think the media are very, very quick to take Hamas casualty figures verbatim. But when And again, this has been studied by several think tanks when using Hamas's own data, when the data is looked at, when the data is studied, there's no correction by the media. The same is the media are very quick to rush to allegations. We saw that on the 17th of October 2023 with the Al Ali Hospital, when the BBC, when several outlets immediately ran with the narrative that Israel had bombed a hospital, the Al Ali Hospital. And when it was investigated, it was found that it was a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket that had fallen short, not in the hospital, which was amazingly intact, but in the parking lot of the hospital, which caused basically a crater in the ground. And yes, unfortunately, several civilians were killed as a result of a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket. But Israel was blamed. And what we saw then were mass protests around the world and synagogues burnt down. We've seen it again and again and again and again ad nauseum with outlets like Sky News, like the BBC. I'm not even going to talk about Al Jazeera because Al Jazeera are Qatari and the mouthpiece of Hamas. Because when you have Al Jazeera journalists on the ground as you are infiltrating Israel, you no longer are a credible media outlet. When we've seen this happen again and again, and the most famous, most recent example I can find is the New York Times perpetuating a blood libel by exploiting sick Palestinian children with congenital disease on the front page of saying Israel is starving Palestinian children. When we investigate the facts, and Israel is still in the process of learning whether or not we have precedent to sue the New York Times as a country for blood libel, when you have children who are suffering from congenital diseases being put out as poster children of starving children, when the reality is that child has cystic fibrosis, or the child in Italy is not even in the Gaza Strip, has actually been evacuated by Israeli forces to Italy for medical treatment, being trotted out as a poster child for starving children, or accusations being made by disgruntled former employees of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation saying the IDF has shot and killed a little boy, and he's interviewed 2 weeks ago on Fox News because he was evacuated from the Gaza Strip, and this is pushed out with the intention of demonizing the state of Israel. Houston, we have a serious, serious problem because, and there's no excuse for misreporting, because as a journalist working here, I get updates, I don't know how many times a day from the IDF, who are sharing as much information as they possibly can in a time of war. We have COGAT, and I ask every viewer right now to go into your Google browser or whatever search engine you are using and type in COGAT. It will take you straight to the COGAT unit's humanitarian aid efforts, and you can monitor for yourself how much humanitarian aid has gone in since before the war, how much of that is fuel, how much of that is food, which terrestrial crossings. Is it coming in from land? Is it coming in from the air? Who are our partners? How much has been distributed? The UN themselves have broadcast their trucks have been looted by Hamas and other terror organizations. We've had the incidents where they very, very quietly, this is the United Nations, UN OCHA, reduced the civilian casualty rate for women and children. And the media does not report that. And they allow these accusations to hang in the air for Israel to be demonized. Now, we're not a perfect country, and we have made ghastly mistakes throughout this war, but we are a democracy that investigates its mistakes. But the media have a moral responsibility and a responsibility of journalistic integrity to report the truth and not whatever narrative your activist journalist seems to think is applicable. And I know this because I've been in the field with some of those journalists.
Rolene, let's talk about solutions here, because just now, in the last couple of days, many countries, certainly European countries, have begun to recognize the state of Palestine. Is this a solution to the problem, to have Palestine as a separate nation with statehood? Is that going to stop it? What is going to stop this particular war that's been going on now for 2 years at the cost of many lives?
The only thing that's going to stop this war is if Hamas surrender and hand back our hostages. It's the only thing. Countries can recognize whatever entities they want to. It doesn't change the reality on the ground. And even the British now former foreign secretary admitted that. The British have said it's to give hope. Hope for what? You can't force states onto people. First of all, they violated their own Oslo Accords, which calls for negotiations. You can recognize whatever you want to. Where are the borders? Who's going to run it? It violates the very foundations of what forms a state. I forget the accords because I've got so much information in my head. I forget the foundational accords and what is the criteria for forming a state, but the Palestinians don't meet any of that. If you had to have elections in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria tomorrow, Hamas win there. You've got countries that...
But like sometimes that's what happens in democracies, is that people that we don't like win elections.
But
that's kind of a hallmark of democracies.
Terrorist organization. There is no way the state of Israel is going to commit suicide by allowing ourselves to be pincered by Hamas on either side. It's all very nice motherhood and apple pie to hear from world leaders saying, well, Hamas can't be involved in a future Palestinian state. How do you intend on enforcing that?
Okay, so what stops this war?
How do you create a state whose foundational documents call for the genocide of the Jewish state? How do you do that? When Hamas is congratulating
Well, there's many countries that are recognized that do that have that in their documents. Doesn't Iran have that in there?
When Hamas is congratulating you, perhaps you're on the wrong side of history. How do we stop this war? And we've said again and again and again and again, the United States backs us and many other countries back us. Give us back our hostages. Hamas, you have caused enough suffering. By recognizing Palestinian states, they have given no incentive to Hamas to hand back those hostages. Hamas have said, these are the fruits of the 7th of October.
Okay, so let's say those hostages got returned tomorrow. How would the war end?
The war ends with Hamas's surrender, because if Hamas hand back the hostages, then they've got no leverage over us, which effectively means they've surrendered. And then you start negotiations
You don't think that if you are in the leadership of Hamas, if you gave back those, the risk being you gave back those hostages, that might just be the complete wipeout. The forces may run through and leave absolutely no one or nothing standing. Is it not their only bargaining chip?
It is their only bargaining chip, and they know it's their only bargaining chip, which is why they are prepared, as they have said again and again and again and again and again, they are prepared to sacrifice their own civilians, and they're prepared to sacrifice ours to remain in power. Now, what we haven't discussed is the Arab League calling for the immediate release of the hostages and for Hamas to surrender. It's
And
absolutely mind-boggling that we've got the Arab League, including, by the way, Qatar, who are certainly no friend of Israel, calling for there to be no Hamas in the Gaza Strip. But we've got Western countries like the United Kingdom, obviously deflecting from the own massive issues in that country, recognizing a Palestinian state without conditions on Hamas. It's absolutely Orwellian.
well, certainly, if I could agree with you on something not getting airplay, it's been the response of the Arab countries, which has been universally to look the other way and whistle, sort of say, please stop it, but do nothing to one way or the other. Few statements, but yeah, shut my borders. We don't want Palestinians. Stop the war if you don't mind. It's been quite telling, the fact that these were countries that just, in the previous wars were very quick to act against Israel. They're now doing nothing and not helping anybody, and they're just sort of sitting this one out, including Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Jordan, and so it goes on. These are countries that just sort of sat out. What's your reading of that situation?
No one wants Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood in our neighborhood. That's the reality. We don't want them in our neighborhood. We also have signed the Abraham Accords, and we're on the cusp of signing with the Saudis when Hamas attacked. And we think that one of the reasons Hamas attacked was to scupper those negotiations with the Saudis. But that's the reality is we don't want the Muslim Brotherhood. We don't want these Islamists in our neighborhood, when you've got countries like the UAE, Bahrain, and Saudi. And yes, we can have separate discussions about their human rights records. But at the end of the day, these are countries that are very much looking towards the future, looking towards a new Middle East. We've also got a very different American president in place at the White House, who means business when it comes to dealing with the Middle East, and what relations between a strong America and the Middle East means. We say in Israel that President Trump speaks Arabic. He doesn't necessarily speak the language, but what we mean by that is he understands how it works in the region. And what we also hear is that there is a lot of support for Israel by these countries behind closed doors, because Israel, whether people agree or not, is doing the dirty work of the region, of the regional powers, and of the world by ridding Iran of its nuclear weapons, and ridding neighboring Syria, Lebanon, and others of Hezbollah, which posed a massive threat to all. So these other countries are very happy to sit back and do nothing while not irritating or antagonizing their own street.
Right. We just want, we are running towards the end of the show, and we haven't mentioned, the big sort of elephant in this room, and that is South Africa. South Africa's role in taking Israel to the International Court of Justice. South Africa finding a new best friend in Iran, because there's no historic ties between South Africa and Iran. That's absolute nonsense. That's for people that don't know history. South Africa had no ties with Iran. In actual fact, the apartheid regime had a relationship with the Shah. In fact, Iran were the bad guys in the struggle, if one was to look at it out of the modern lens. So, what was the feeling in Israel when South Africa took up the case at lightning speed? You know how slow things happen in South Africa. But within a matter of literally weeks, we were we've just recently had a famous incident now where one of our police chiefs made a few accusations. It took 2 months to get that commission of inquiry going. We managed to get to the ICJ with less than a month. So what was the feeling in Israel and the region about South Africa's case in the ICJ and our friendship with Iran?
Well, I can tell you immediately. First of all, it was like incredulity that, South Africa, basically, who's got no dog in the race here, is getting involved. And also, you could see the signs of it coming when, literally, in the hours after the 7th of October, Naledi Pandor, the then international relations minister, basically blamed Israel and then quickly hopped on a plane to Iran and a phone call to Ismail Haniyeh. And my condolences to Naledi, who seems to have lost many of her friends in the last 2 years. But we knew that there was something very, very, very suspicious, because we had barely begun our military campaign when these accusations were made, with the most ludicrous the most ludicrous accusations, like the term Amalek. And in fact, the whole thing of Amalek, never forget what Amalek did to your people, is actually inscribed on the building at The Hague. So we knew that this was pre-planned. This was pre-planned even before the war. I'd wager you a guess. And we certainly see it on social media. Organization like Al-Quds in South Africa start to speak about a famine on the 9th of October. That's very, very, very suspicious, when 2 days after a major attack, you're already pushing that kind of narrative. So we knew immediately that there's something suspicious. We are Israel, that we have intelligence cynically programmed into all of our heads. And I think everybody went on the investigation to see very quickly how we can connect the dots, which of course we now know leads us back to Iran. Whether or not it can be proven, where the money came from. It looked very, very suspicious to us that all of a sudden, after a visit to Tehran, the ANC's massive debts were cleared. You don't have to be a Mossad agent to figure that one out.
No, you don't have to be. In fact, this lowly non-agent over here has made that, because it's almost impossible not to draw that conclusion. But certainly I can tell you that that's come at a cost for South Africa, not as a profit. It wasn't something that was wildly, applauded. There were some really serious sort of thinking on the issue, but certainly we've shown our hands. But Rolene, it's fascinating to get the accounts of somebody who's there. On this channel, we like to get any view, either side. We are not scared of them, and it's wonderful to speak to you. And I understand it's tough times for everybody in that region. Keep your head down, and thank you so much for joining us on the State of the Nation. I'm sure this won't be the last time we speak to one another, because the situation is fluid and things are going to change, and you're going to hear from us again. So to Rolene Marks in Israel, thank you so much for joining us and shedding light from the Israeli perspective on the war in Israel and Palestine. And to everybody that joined us today, I'm sure we're going to get a lot of commentary. We're pretty happy to have it, and we'll hear from all sides. But to Rolene, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you again on the State of the Nation. Thank you so much for joining us today.